All right, everybody. Welcome to, I don't know, more bugs with me, Eric Keller. And we are going to continue today working on the sci-fi original creature, original insect that I started a few sessions ago. And today I'm going to work on the abdomen. So this right here, of course, is the Vespa mandarina, otherwise known as the giant Japanese hornet. It's a model I've been working on for a while. And I just wanted to bring this up first just to give you an idea of the kind of things I want to focus on in today's session. So, let's see. So a lot of it is this very cool overlapping kind of situation here we have here with the tergites of the abdomen here. So the abdomen is basically, in insects, is where they keep a lot of their important internal organs, along with stingers or ovipositors. It's where all the good stuff is, and a lot of times they are covered in these plates. These are called tergites. Let me make sure that I'm getting the spelling right on that as well. Do a quick little bit of research here, just to make sure I'm not making stuff up. Yeah, so it's called tergites. We take a look at the abdomen. Let's see if we can find a better one. Go look up, do a Google search for insect tergites. You'll see a lot of examples right here. So, and what's cool about this, I mean, they're very interesting in the way that they kind of overlap and they create this sort of a flexible kind of armor. It's not a perfect situation. As you can see, in some cases, you actually have little parasites growing in between these plates here on this wasp. This is a paper wasp. Pretty gross, man, but also kind of interesting if you're into that kind of thing. So, which obviously I am. A lot of the other things that we might notice about with insect abdomens is you will have these things called spiracles. These are little holes. This is what lets the oxygen into the animal because they don't have active lungs. So that's what we're going to work on today. And since I'm doing like a mud dauber wasp, let's take a look, or something based on a mud dauber wasp, I should say. We had this interesting situation. We had this long kind of stick, and the abdomen's on the very end of it right here. So we have the thorax right here, and then up to the abdomen. That's kind of what I have designed right here. But you can see in my model, it's kind of very loosely blocked out. So we're going to refine that today. So let's get to it. Oops, hold on a second real quick. Don't want to lose my stream. Okay. All right, so, and then you can see some of my, well, we can take a break from the reference for a moment. I think this is, here's a good example right here. So I'm going to create this overlapping structure. Okay, let's just do it. So I'm going to switch over to my bug here. And I'm going to ignore that. So right now we have this is kind of in a little Dynamesh state. So what I'm going to do first is just kind of draw out how I want the plates to look on the abdomen, and then based on that, I'll actually start making separate geometry for each plate. And I'm just going to turn on the solo button here. Actually, let's clear the mask. Let's do this. I'm going to do a split hidden here. So under subtool, split hidden, so that means that this is now its own subtool and the abdomen is separate. And go down here and check out my Dynamesh settings. Let's move this up a little bit and re-Dynamesh, and that closes that hole right there. So we get about 445,000 points. And let's go over to, leave this off to the side for a second. SK cloth. Or you could use Damn Standard for this. That works pretty well as well, but I like the SK cloth brush. And let's just start drawing the first one right here. This is going to be kind of like this. Get my clay tubes going as well. There we go. Bring down the Z intensity. Just kind of block this out real quick. Hold on a second. And then I'm just going to draw these in. And typically we're going to have something like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 5 or 6. So let's see if you can fit 6 in here. 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. And then we'll make a stinger coming out of the end here. Yes, I'm using a Cintiq. I love Cintiqs. I have 2 of them. They're fantastic. If you're there are some times when I use a mouse when I'm working in ZBrush. I think it's just instinctive. Like when I'm using Z Modeler and I'm doing a lot of, polygon, edge, point, and face editing. Since that to me feels a lot like Maya, I tend to end up using a mouse when I'm doing that. I kind of just do it unconsciously, but most of the time when I'm sculpting, I use a tablet, Cintiq, and I also have the Space Mouse. There's one right here, which is really cool. It's also nice. It kind of saves a little wear and tear on my wrist when I'm using that. One thing that'd be really cool is if you were using the Space Mouse. Like, what I love to be able to do is with my left hand kind of like spin this around and then sculpt while it's spinning, kind of like a lathe, but it's kind of not set up to do that, unfortunately. That would be pretty cool. But you could do the same thing with radial symmetry anyways. It's just be kind of a neat thing to play with. Okay, so now what we want to do is we're going to create kind of the overlap here. So we're going to have basically, I think I might even bring this down a little bit more. So that's all the way to the opening there. Something like that. And then go over here, and I want this to kind of come out like this. Sorry, like that. This is a whole plate, right? So the trick is, if we take a look, and this can sometimes mess with your head just a little bit, right? We want to have, hide this real quick. right? So we want to have this one on top of this one, but this one's on top of this one, and this one's on top of this one, and this one's on top of that one. So that's an alternating pattern that we want to keep in mind while we're sculpting this. So I think what I want to do is actually have it kind of like this. All right, so this is on top of this one, so let's fill that in a little bit. There's a lot of stuff when sculpting with insects that can start to make your brain do somersaults. A good example is, when you're working on like beetles look deceptively easy at first, but when you really start to sculpt a beetle and getting into all the details, especially the underside, you can get into some stuff that will really mess with your head. I think that's kind of the fun of it. It's like a puzzle. So you kind of have to keep track of where you are as you're sculpting the anatomy of whatever insect you're sculpting. But it's like that for a lot of organic shapes. I mean, there's plenty of spots in the human body that can make your brain do somersaults. They look easy at first, and then when you start working on them, whether it's drawing or sculpting, whatever, it can really start to mess with your brain. Okay, so this is on top of this, but this is on top of this, right? And then let's get this one, and we'll say this is kind of like this. So when in doubt, just draw on a simple piece of geometry, and then you can start to separate out the surfaces after you've drawn them on. That makes things a lot easier. Cintiq is, yes, is a type of display tablet. So I'm drawing directly on the screen. I've had a few Cintiqs. The more recent models seem to last forever. They're amazing. I have one over there that is probably like 15 years old, and it still runs just absolutely perfectly. It's nice to have a couple identical setups, because then I could do twice as much work, right? Well, theoretically. If I'm rendering on one machine, I can ZBrush on the other. That's the basic idea. So I'm not crazy about this. Is like a little bit rounder here. So I'm just going fast and loose. Just making sketch marks so I have an idea of what I'm supposed to be doing here. Get the move brush, and oops. Looks like little lips. It's kind of gross. Okay. this. So again, I'm always trying to pay attention to, while I'm sculpting, what's on top of what is in front of the other thing. Something that I think I mentioned before, I picked up, you know, I always kind of knew it subconsciously, but I didn't really pay close attention until I was studying jewelry sculpting with Tomas Wittelsbach, and that's something that he always emphasizes. And once you really think about it and really pay attention to it, it makes your sculpts a lot more clear, gives you a better idea what's going on, and of course also helps you figure out when you're making mistakes like I am right now. Okay, so this, make sure we got the alternation correct. So this is on top of this one, and this is on top of that, and this is on top of this, but this is overlapping that. This is on top of this, but this is overlapping that. This is on top of this, but this is overlapping this. So this last one right here, I think, should be overlapping like this. I think at the end here it gets a little bit more confusing, but I think that kind of works. Redynamesh real quickly, and then just make this a little bit more clear. Okay, I think that works. Yeah, that works. Let's do a little bit of shaping here. Take a look at our silhouette. I mean, overall, I kind of like it. I don't want it to be too big. Maybe make it a little bit wider here. Maybe a complement to this shape. And just give it a little bit more of an arc. Something like that. It's pretty cool. And of course, we gotta save. Let's do save next and drink a beer. So just kind of a reminder of where we're headed here. But yes, speaking of terminology, you can call this abdomen. It's also in ants known as a gaster. I think that's also true for other insects as well, but I always associate the term gaster with ants. But of course, ants and wasps and bees are all related. So at this stage, what I usually do is I could do a little bit more refinement here, but we don't have to go too crazy, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use mesh extraction to get a couple of these plates, and then I'm just going to duplicate the plates and place them according to this block out. I think that's the easiest way to do it. I like to make sure, rather than making this one piece of geometry with just kind of these divisions sculpted on it, I think it's much better to make each tergite its own separate piece of geometry, especially if you're going to rig and animate these things, because you want that, you want to be able to rig it so that they're flexible and they move, and it makes it much more realistic. It also makes things like when you're shading and you're creating translucence shading or subsurface scattering, you know, having those separate plates will really make it much more realistic, I think. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is okay. I'm going to paint a mask on this one right here. All right. And then I'm going to go old school and do a little mesh extraction. So I'll go down here to extract. I'm just going to keep this simple. Let's set the thickness to like 0.01. Do extract. Let's see in here. That might be too thin. Yeah, it's a little too thin. Let's do 0.005. That works. And I'll do accept. So that's going to make a separate subtool. So here's my extracted subtool. Clear the mask. Let's do a little quick Dynamesh here. Smooth it out a little bit. Don't have to go too crazy. Let me get rid of that blob a little bit. And then let's do a ZBrush. So I'm going to set this to, let's just set this to half and make sure the symmetry is on, and then I'll hit ZBrush and take a sip of beer. And maybe smooth this out a little bit. ZBrush again. So I'm going to get this nice and low poly. That'll make it much easier to manipulate. How many years have I been using ZBrush? I've been using ZBrush since 2004, so yeah, that's like 20 years now. Definitely my favorite piece of software. Does ZBrush decimate the model? Actually, no, what it does is it creates a quad topology that is, it's kind of like, it's basically doing an auto retopology. So as opposed to doing this by hand, which would take a fair amount of time, this allows you, I mean, it does a pretty good job of kind of following the contours of the model. There's some tricks you can do to make it even a little bit better. So for example, I can use polygroups to kind of guide the ZBrush. Now there's other things you can use like curves and that kind of stuff. I like to keep things simple. So maybe what I'll do is I'll look at the top here and I'll do polygroups, and I'll do like group front, right? So that creates a polygroup just on the parts that I could see in the front here. So I kind of have two polygroups, one on the bottom, one on the top. The edge here is not perfect. That's okay, because now what I'll do is I'll go in here to ZBrush and turn on keep groups and do a ZBrush, and you can see how that kind of cleans up the edge there. But you can also see how by having those polygroups, now I have an edge loop that kind of goes all the way around, so it kind of helps eliminate the spirals. You can always check this. If I go over to the select lasso brush, I'm holding Control and Shift, choosing select lasso. And if I do Control Shift click on an edge here, it hides an edge loop. So you can see that edge loop does go all the way around, so it doesn't create a spiral. You can see brush. So that's kind of what I want. So I'll bring that back here, and I'll just do that a few more times to get it a low poly. So what Decimate does, of course, is Decimate triangulates the model, and it tries to keep as much of the detail as possible. So it increases the amount of geometry in areas of high detail and lower geometry in areas of low detail. And decimation is great, especially if you're setting up a model for just export to print and that kind of thing. Or if you're doing like a terrain thing, you don't want to use like displacement maps. Use it all the time for rocks when I'm rendering rocks in Maya and that kind of thing. But ZBrush, on the other hand, is more about creating a geometry that is easier to sculpt with, and in some cases you can even use it for the animation model. The nice thing about doing insects is that you can get away, since they're not as flexible as, say, the human face or muscles and skin. You don't have to be quite so insane about how you do the topology. You can get away with being a little bit looser. So that's one of the reasons I like working on them. So I'm going to do a couple more ZBrushes. Okay, so that's looking pretty good right there. And we got it down to 816 points. So what I can do now is, let's do this. Let's turn on transparency. I'm just going to use the move brush for a couple seconds just to shape it a little bit more. And we could do more later, but I just want to make sure it's kind of following my guidelines there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control W just to make a polygroup for the whole thing, right? So I don't need those separate polygroups anymore now that I have the geometry the way I like it. If I have too many edges here, I could always remove that with ZModeler, but I think it's okay for now. So now what I'm going to do is, let's turn off the solo button. Spiral is irritating because, you know, if you don't have spirals, then it's much easier to unfold the model to make UVs. It's true, it's also kind of not great for animation models. I mean, like for this thing, which wouldn't be bending, deforming too much, you could probably get away with it. But the main reason I don't like spirals is it's difficult to work with when working with UVs and that kind of thing. So I'm going to bring our gizmo here and set it in the center. I'm going to turn off symmetry for a second, center the gizmo, and then I'm going to hold the control key and move this with the gizmo. And what that does is that creates a copy of the geometry and masks the original one. So this way, this is going to save me a lot of time when making the additional tergites here for the abdomen. So now what I need to do is, let's do this. I'm going to clear the mask there, and then I'm going to do polygroups, auto groups. So each one has its own polygroup. That way I can hide this one. Hello. Hide this polygroup. And now I can kind of position this one where I want it. Oops, let's turn on symmetry. When you're looking at insects, various different types of insects, the abdomens are going to be similar in some ways. Like you often find these plates, these tergite plates, but like with wasps and ants, you'll have, for the most part, you'll just see these outer plates. With flies, you'll actually see, and some other insects, you'll actually see kind of a soft tissue in between the tergites that can expand and contract, and sometimes very dramatically, especially with flies. So, or sometimes you'll see these tergites, rather than creating this closed shell, you'll see them kind of fused with this soft tissue, and as the soft tissue expands, the tergites kind of separate, and you can see that separation between the spaces between. And I didn't know that the first time I modeled a fly. I did it all wrong because I was assuming that all abdomens are the same, but they're not. There's significant differences between the different types of insects. So something to pay attention to. So I think this will be okay. This is why I didn't spend a whole lot of time blocking out the position of these in the abdomen, because I know it's going to change. Whoops. As I where'd you go? There'd you go. Okay, let's bring back the other one. So that's looking pretty good. Turn off symmetry. And we'll do this again. Control drag with this. So you can see it's kind of a lot of rinse and repeat here. You know, with the algorithm that they use for ZBrush gets better and better, so I don't run into spirals as much as I used to. But I always like to use polygroups as a way to guide the topology when I'm using ZBrush, because polygroups are easy to set up and work with, so I think that's always cool. Okay, let's do this, and then do another polygroup, auto group, and Control Shift click on this one, just real quick. Okay. Oops. One thing we should definitely do is save next. Why do people text me when I'm live streaming? I don't know. Another obviously great option to use when working on this is the mask by polygroup. So I've actually moved this slider down here on my interface, but if you go into the brush palette under auto masking, mask by polygroups, so that just basically means that since I have a separate polygroup for each one of these pieces now, as I move one around, it won't affect the other. So if I set this to 0, right, it's going to affect the whole model as I use the move brush. As I set this to 100, then it's only going to affect the polygroup that I touch, and that's really useful when working with these kinds of overlapping pieces. They get kind of complicated. And let's do this. Hold the Control key and duplicate that. You can see it gets a little bit faster as we get down here into the smaller ones. Right. See, it's starting to look pretty cool. Only one more to do for the top, and then of course we can kind of duplicate all of them at the top, rotate them around, and then fit them into place in the bottom, so that saves us some more work. Okay, one more. All right. Let's do a quick auto groups. I'm going to set my mask by polygroups down to 0. It's an easy one to forget that's on, and then things start acting weird. I wonder what's going on. And I'm going to What I might do is I might duplicate this subtool. So let's rename it. I'm going to call it upper abdomen or whatever, just so I know what it is. And then I'm going to just duplicate the whole thing and turn off symmetry and just hold the shift key and rotate it around like this. So the upper one is still on. And like this. Now I'm just going to turn off everything but these two right here. Actually, let's do this. Keep forgetting to turn on symmetry. There we go. Symmetry is on. There we go. Let's pull this down like this. Things get too stretched, I can always just Z-remesh it to fix that. But for right now, I just kind of care about the shape overall. The problem I use when I'm using the move brush, I use this trick where I use the Alt button to kind of pull out, straight out, based on the normal direction. The only problem is the Alt key is also what you use to switch subtools. So if I Alt click and accidentally hit that subtool, well, I accidentally switch subtools. So you see that happens to me a bit. It's kind of annoying. Let's bring back the other ones. What do polygroups do for your model? I would say polygroups, mastering polygroups is probably the key to mastering ZBrush. They do an awful lot of things. They can, like I've shown before, they can help you control the topology edge flow when you do a Z-remesh. They can allow you to isolate parts of the model. Like you can see, I'm using polygroups so that I can isolate the visibility of just this piece. They're used in a lot of different functions in ZBrush, so it's a really important thing to learn to master. I always kind of think of polygroups as like, I mean, they're kind of like they're more of a tool than anything else, but in a way that's kind of temporary. So if you can imagine, you know, if you were laying things out on an artboard in the real world, right? Like pictures with actual poster board and images and that kind of stuff, you'd probably use masking tape to tape pictures to an artboard, right? So that masking tape or whatever tape you're using is just a temporary fixative to help you arrange things while you're working. I think of polygroups as kind of like that. They're kind of like you know, you can change, I change them constantly while I'm working, depending on what I'm doing at the time. And that's kind of a good thing. I don't get hung up on creating perfect polygroups and try and keep them perfect throughout the entire modeling process. It's more like something I can use when I need to isolate a part or do a retopology or create a mask or mask by polygroups or a number of other things. So it's kind of like they're just a very useful part of working in ZBrush. I mean, you know, I mean, there's so many different uses for them. It'd be hard to list them all. I'm kind of not conscious of it until I'm actually using them, you know. So what I want to do here is I want to make sure, you can see how it's looking kind of funky here. I'm going to make sure that I have double display properties set to double, so that if things start to overlap, you know, since this object has thickness to it, you can see how these things are kind of overlapping a little bit as I stretch and push. If you don't have this double on, you can't really see that. This is easy to leave off by mistake. It's important, especially because sometimes you can flip your normals when you're working. So I've got to fix this. A couple things I could do to fix this. Let's first try using move topological. See if that helps. No, the pieces are too close together. So another thing I could try is maybe the inflate brush with a very low Z intensity. To see if I can get that to, yeah, see, now it's, this is also why you'll see I'm often model with the polyframe button on, especially at low, when I'm working the lower subdivision levels, just so I can see when something like that happens. You want to kind of nip it in the bud early, because it's more of a pain to fix later on. Let's see, let's take a look at this one. So I'm just using the inflate brush with a really low Z intensity to kind of, let's see, I can do smooth as well. That would be too low. There we go. It's a bit faster. There we go. That was just because it was like pulling and stretching things around. But sometimes if you do things like, you know, mirror an object, it can cause the normals to be reversed. So you want to be careful, because that's a real pain to fix when you get into like UVs and things like that. Do I have any idea when the topology brush will be fixed in 2024? No, because I don't have any knowledge of what's going on in the inner workings of ZBrush. But are you talking about the Z modeler brush, and what specifically is it that's bothering you about the way that it works? Or the way that it's not working? Yeah, I can see this one. Just inflate the whole thing. There we go. Let's make sure we're using the right one here. Oops. Sip of beer. I mean, there's a move topological. Is that the brush that you're having issues with, or is it Z modeler or another brush? I know there's a topology brush. This one, the topology brush, which I never use because I guess I've always considered it broken. I'm just not a big fan of that one. I find it more trouble than it's worth. So maybe that's the one you're referring to. So in that case, I definitely don't know when it will be fixed, because I never use it, because I hate it. How's that for an answer? I find, you know, if I'm going to do hand retopology, then I'm going to go with the Z modeler brush. and use the edge extrude to just kind of the same way I would use like quad draw in Maya. Okay, looks like my symmetry is a little bit off here. See how this is off a little bit. So let's do this. I'm going to bring this back, and let's see, are there any other symmetry problems? Right now I could basically do like, let's see if I do a mirror and weld. And then I'm going to do a quick ZBrush, keep groups, and I'll set this to same. Just to kind of fix things a little bit. Probably more edge loops than I want, but that's okay. I'll probably re-ZBrush it a few times, but I just want to make sure that my symmetry doesn't get too far off. Because a lot of times when I'm moving things around, I'm turning symmetry on and off, and sometimes I forget and accidentally move something and the symmetry gets out of whack. So at this low poly early stage, then I'll just use like mirror and weld to fix those issues when they arise. I'm just going to kind of get this loosely in place, and then I'll work on refining their placement in a moment once I have these blocked out. Yeah, the ZModeler brush is really cool. In a lot of ways, I'll use it a lot like I used to use. What I used to do before they had ZModeler is I would do a lot of Dynamesh and that kind of stuff in rough ZBrush, and then I'd send it over to Maya and use Quad Draw to actually draw out a topology. As you can imagine, that's a little bit time consuming, and it's annoying to go back between two pieces of software, because that's where you can start to introduce additional problems. So then when they added the ZModeler and then kind of perfected that extrude edge option, that's when now I do hand topology in ZBrush. But again, sometimes I just try and see what I can get away with using ZBrush first, and because especially when I have a lot of bug models to do, don't always have the luxury of time to like baby over every single vertex in a model. I've got to get the things out really quickly, relatively quickly, I should say. And so in that case, I'll use ZBrush as much as possible because it's nice and fast, and then ZModeler. Where ZModeler, of course, is really useful, is especially if I'm trying to create like a game mesh, as opposed to like this would be a mesh that I would create for maybe animation in like Maya or Blender or whatever. Not necessarily a game mesh, but if I wanted to create like a low poly game mesh, then I'm probably going to use ZModeler to do a hand retopology. But I'll usually do that after I've gotten a more refined model complete, because then you can just use that as a basis. So I always try and create like a really nice animation model with clean topology, nice UVs, and the whole bit, something I can rig and animate. And then from that model, I will derive other models, like if I wanted to do a version of this to 3D print, or if I wanted to do a version of this I wanted to use in a game engine like Unreal or Unity or whatever. But having that original base, high quality base model is always a great place to start from, because then it's just easy to adapt to other purposes. And I'm just, I build a library of insects on my hard drive. They're always useful. I mean, the other thing is, I could always just, instead of modeling this from scratch, I could have just grabbed the abdomen from one of my other wasp models and thrown it in here and adapted that. But I wanted to demonstrate my process as part of the live stream, so I'm doing it kind of from scratch here. Let's get a little funky here. It's okay. What are the pictures behind? You're talking about these pictures right here? These are, this is my reference, and this is an application. It's a separate application called PureRef, which is really great. It's like $40 or something like that. It's just a really nice reference. You can just drag pictures onto it from online or anywhere else, and then just create like a library, and then it's always above, or I have it always above my ZBrush so that I can take a quick look at my reference while I'm working. But yeah, it's a really cool program. I think that's what you're referring. In my camera window, you're talking about this one right here. The frame. Oh, the actual pictures. Yes. Well, since you asked, those are pictures of bugs, of course. So those are images that I took on various bug shots. A bug shot workshop is like, well, yeah, I don't know if you can see it better now. But yeah, so I do a little bit of photography. I don't know if you can see that with my camera, but it's a great reference, and also gets me out in the wild and up close to the insects, literally. So that's what they are. So a lot of those are actually taken when I went on a trip to Mozambique, to a park called Gorongosa, which is in Mozambique. It is a national park in Africa, and it's the most amazing place in the world. I think it's an amazing place because of its history. There's a few specials, like Nova specials or National Geographic specials on Gorongosa. They're worth checking out. But basically, the history is that it was a national park way back in the 1910, 1920s, and 30s. It was a popular place to go on safari. You'd have rich people would go there and they'd shoot animals and congratulate themselves for shooting animals and that kind of thing. And then, of course, there was a civil war, a brutal civil war that lasted many decades and completely destroyed most of the wildlife in the park, because a lot of it was poached for meat, for eating, for soldiers and that kind of thing, and a lot of them were, just shot out of cruelty or whatever, or sold, and so a lot of the wildlife was completely destroyed. And then in the, I want to say late 90s or so, when the Civil War finally ended, or they got some amount of peace, there's still conflict going on there. They wanted to restore the park and bring the wildlife back. And so there was a guy named Greg Carr who was one of these tech billionaires. Like, imagine a non-evil version of Elon Musk, but not quite as rich. Sorry, for Elon Musk fans out there, I know I'm editorializing. Let's just say a very different kind of billionaire than the ones we see in the news all the time. Greg Carr keeps kind of a low profile. But in any case, he was looking for he made a bunch of money on the internet, didn't know what to do with it, so he was looking for a project to invest his money in, and the great entomologist E.O. Wilson suggested that he spend his money restoring Gorongosa, bringing the wildlife back. And so that's what he's been doing. It's been a passion project of his for the past 10, 15 years. And back in 2018, I got an opportunity to go there with the bug shot people. So this was a workshop where we go and take pictures of bugs and hang out with scientists. It's a lot of fun. So we were there for about 10 days. It was really amazing. And while I was there, we got to see what they're doing. So rather than just coming in there and trying to save the place and throw in animals, what they did instead was they created a plan whereby they could help the local economy of the people who lived around the park And so that would create an incentive for them for the local people to be involved with the park, and also de-incentivize things like poaching and stuff like that, which of course is still a huge problem. So you have a lot of these people who weren't, for a while, were poaching mainly so that they could get some money and they could eat. Now they have jobs as park rangers, and they started a coffee company called the Gorongosa Coffee Company. Aren't you sorry you asked me about the pictures? And the reason that I like it, other than it's such an amazing and beautiful place, is that it kind of shows that it is possible to fix the damage that human beings have done to nature, if you really want to. That's the only thing that's lacking. It's not an issue of technology. It's not even an issue of money a lot of times. It's really just an issue of, do we actually want to fix all the damage that we've done to places like Gorongosa? And I find it inspiring because it shows that we actually can if we want to. Since they started restoring the park, they brought back, a lot of the elephant population is resurging again. The elephants really don't like people. Some of the elephants still have bullet holes in their ears from the Civil War. And if you run into an elephant in Gorongosa, you want to get the hell out of there because they do not like people at all. But they also have lions, and they reintroduced hyenas. When I was there, they were actually bringing back the wild painted dogs, and now they're thriving. And so it's a really cool place, and it's worth checking out. There's some cool books about it too. But that's what the pictures are. Do I have insect pets in home too? No, I don't. And the reason is because I know for a fact that I'm good with dogs, but when it comes to little critters, I know I'm going to kill them. So I'm not even good with plants, so I keep my pets set to dogs. But I'd love to have like a tarantula or something like that. I just had a friend who had a tarantula, and she really loved it a lot, and then accidentally fed it the wrong kind of beetle, and it keeled over dead, and it was just heartbreaking for her. So I don't know if I could do that. I know I would make the same mistake. Have I tried eating insects? Hey, Sierra Leone, nice to meet you. I'm glad you're here. I'm hoping I get a chance to go back to Africa at some point, because it's such a cool continent, and nobody in the United States really understands it. They think it's just this one big place that Bob Geldof goes to sing songs at. It's kind of a shame. I have eaten a few insects. I get the cricket treats for my dogs. Don't tell them that though, because they shouldn't. I don't want them to know that they're eating crickets. I still find it kind of gross. It's just a mental thing. They don't taste any different from they taste like kind of peanuts and that kind of stuff. But for some reason, I have a mental block about eating them, even though I know it's good for the environment. I really should probably get into it more, but. I mean, really, if you're eating like, shrimp or lobster, you're eating bugs anyway, so. But it is a good source of protein. I just have sort of a mental block when it comes to eating them. Oops. Okay, let me fix the position here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is let's switch back to the Move brush and turn on Mask by Polygroups. Let's save next. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But of course, if you look at a cow up close, it probably doesn't look as appetizing either. It probably looks pretty scary. It's different when it's steak, I guess. Okay, so let's do this. Now what I want to do is start to refine the position of these things. So I could combine this into one subtool. So hold on a second. I'll do a quick ZBrush on both of these, so the topology kind of follows the shape a little bit better. And then I'm going to merge these two subtools into one. See if that makes it any easier. So I'll do merge down. So now they're one subtool. Just make sure I want to do another auto groups. Just to make sure that everything has its own polygroup. Each mesh has its own polygroup. Okay, cool. And now what I can do is turn off the line here. Start to refine this a little bit so that I can get that kind of overlapping quality. So I have mask by polygroup on. I'm using the move brush, and then I'm holding the Alt key as I kind of push in and out here to get the overlap correct. This is, I mean, this is a cool technique. If you're coming up with armor that you want to base on like a insect design or something like that, like a spacesuit or whatever, this kind of overlapping, alternating kind of look is really a cool one to bring into your designs, I think. I'm going to lower the Z intensity on my move brush a little bit, just make it easier to use. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then this one's actually not too bad either. Just make it a little bit more obvious. Okay, so we'll have this over this, this over this, this over this, this over this. Okay. Never hurts to say it out loud, just so you know what you're doing. Tighten this up a little bit. If you've never done an insect before, I always recommend starting with an ant, because they're very kind of, ants are much cooler than you think when you start to really get into their anatomy, but also everything is kind of pretty straightforward with an ant. You pretty much can see all the parts. Whereas if something like a beetle is a lot harder, because beetles are like little tanks and there's so many parts that are kind of folded up in on each other that it can be kind of hard to figure out exactly what's going on. But an ant is like nice, it's like a stick figure, right? So it's a nice basic starting place, and then you don't have to necessarily worry about the wings when you're working, unless you're doing a male ant or a queen, obviously. But I would just start with a worker, you know, and then look at the diversity of ant faces online. It's really incredible. Then, you know, when you're feeling good about that, maybe done a couple ants, different species or whatever, then like wasps are a lot of fun. Wasps and bees, of course. Anytime you're doing a bee, you're going to be working with a lot of hair. Bee, like honeybees especially, are just mostly hair. Is what we're seeing. So when you're modeling a honeybee, you have to try and imagine it without the fur while you're modeling. That can be a little bit tricky. Yeah, I would say that insects are definitely armored creatures. If you do butterflies, butterflies are cool, but once you do the wings, the rest of the butterflies is not quite as interesting. Butterflies are really all about poly painting and texturing, and also a lot about hair too. They are cool though, but they're a pretty good, easy one to do, I think, as opposed to something like a beetle or a praying mantis is a bit more difficult, mainly because their anatomy can get really wild and weird, and but definitely worth giving a try because they're really inspiring. And then I mentioned before, if you could get your hands on some scan data, that's also a good way to start. You can go to Sketchfab or other websites and find some free insect scan data and use that as a starting place. That's very helpful. Okay, so this must be here. This is where it gets tricky. Let's take a look. Well, it looks pretty good. Do have some gaps here and there, but I think overall it's alright. So let's take a look at it with and then what I can do, this piece right here, which is our original block up, I can use this for the interior of the abdomen. So what I'll do is I'll turn on transparency, and then I'm just going to do, let's turn on solo real quick. I'm just going to smooth this out real quick. And then do like a ZBrush, get it down to a little blob. What's the most difficult, challenging insect that you modeled or tricky to photograph in real life? Okay, so ants are one of the hardest to photograph in real life because they move so fast and they're so small. So the trick is, I remember one day I was trying to take pictures of these ants, and then it suddenly dawned on me at like a granola bar. So I just took a little piece of granola bar, threw it on the ground, and then the ants got a lot easier because they all went around the granola and they started chewing on it. So I got some nice pictures there. The hardest model that I've ever done, and I'll show you, and I've never finished it because it's so freaking hard, but it's a type of beetle. It's a very cool type of beetle. I'll bring up my website here real quick so I can show you what I mean. And it's not my favorite model, like I say, it's something I haven't finished yet. This one right here. This is a beetle that collapses in like a little ball on itself, and really hard to model because, you know, do you model it closed or do you model it open? So that's what it looks like closed. It needs a lot of work. It's not finished yet, but it's a tricky one because you can see all the different parts inside there. It's like a little samurai. So I even had a scientist sent me a bunch of these, and that I actually looked at under a microscope while I was working on it. But even then, it's still really hard. But it's got some wild pieces to it. So that's like I say, it's not there yet. It needs a lot of work, but it's a cool bug for sure. An interesting modeling challenge. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that I've had. I think this one, the rainbow scarab, is another tricky one. Again, because beetles are such little tanks, the little parts in the inside here, you kind of have to take them apart to see what's going on. But this was a fun one, especially because the shading made it really an interesting challenge to get that kind of metallic shading. So, and then I actually rigged this one for animation. I should do some more animations with it. But it's just, you know, these pieces right here, it looks simple enough, but when you're actually modeling it, and again, I did actually have actual specimen that I kind of looked at under a microscope. It's just one of those things that makes your brain start doing somersaults when you're trying to work out these shapes. But that was a fun one for sure. So I think those are the two of the hardest ones that I've done. A lot of these things I did off of scan data, these crustaceans and stuff. So those were definitely a challenge too, because the scan data starting out with it sometimes it needs a lot of cleanup before it works. So anyways, but yeah, if you want to check out my website, it's bluepatone.com. You can see some of the other stuff that I've worked on. Let's do this. Yeah, it's a rainbow scarab. Phanius. Wait, damn it! I know the species name. Damn it! I can't believe I didn't put down the. Well, it doesn't matter. It's rainbow scarab beetle. Let's just stick with that. Phanius vindex, that's what it is. Sorry, it's left my mind. It's a cool name. Whoops. Okay, I'm gonna fix the mesh here. Another hard one that I've done, which is actually still one of my favorites, is the tailless whip scorpion. That's the Emblypygid. It was a really terrifying looking thing, but they're really cool to model. Yeah, like I say, if you're interested in doing bugs, I do have several Gnomon Workshop videos. You're giving me an opportunity to plug them. So if you're curious, let's take a quick look here real quick. Give me an opportunity to show up. Okay, so here's a good one. This orchid mantis. I have an entire tutorial series on the Gnomon Workshop. Check it out. Going all the way from beginning to finished model and texturing and rendering in Marmoset. And why do I not have a link to it? Here we go. Yeah, so it's called Creature Modeling with ZBrush and Marmoset Tool Bag. And it's got 22 chapters. And it also does include some scene files, so you can check that out. And then I also have several other ones. I have hyper-realistic insect design. This is another wasp. Again, all the way from beginning to completed model. That's 21 chapters, and I talk about insect anatomy in that one. So you can check that out in the Gnomon Workshop. This one I think I rendered in Octane. I've kind of switched over to Redshift, so I might have to update that one at some point. And then if you're more of a spider person, I have a jumping spider tutorial series. This one's rendering in Redshift, and I also talk about using Yeti to do the fur. So all three of those are available in the Gnomon Workshop, and this one is actually 25 chapters, so it's a bit longer. I'm long-winded, so my tutorial series tend to be pretty long. So you can check those out. The hyper-realistic insect design one is a good one to start with if you've never done bugs before. That's sort of the intro version. And this week I got to remember to go to 9:30. Last week I accidentally ended at 9 o'clock when I meant to go for 2 hours. So. Okay, let's see, remesh this sucker. So this one this one is just going to be kind of like, so it's going to be on the inside here of this, which, you know, if I end up rendering this, in Maya or something like that, that could be kind of useful to kind of just have an interior surface, so I don't have like obvious holes in the model, you know, just look kind of weird. Just gonna tuck everything in there, and then I think I saw like a weird spot right here. So I'm gonna geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. Okay. Let me just subdivide it a few times. Okay, so now let's do the fun part, which is starting to sculpt on this thing. So now I can subdivide it. Let's save real quick. Do save next. And I can subdivide it and start blocking in some more details and making it look a bit more organic and cool. Like you see on some of my reference here. Let's take a quick look. Here's a katydid, and it has spiracles on it. Those dots are spiracles. You know, and depending on the type of bug that you're creating, here's a tree hopper. These things are completely ridiculous. You know, each insect has its own personality for the detail. As you can see in this grasshopper here, as opposed to, see how smooth and elegant the abdomen here is here. Don't even see the divisions. That one doesn't even look like a real bug. You can see on a dragonfly, it has an abdomen as well, but see how different it is compared to the other types of insects. I've done a few dragonflies before. They're a lot of fun to model, and especially the wings and the wing muscles. So that's a good one to try. I would say that's a bit more advanced than, say, an ant. But for wasps, you're going to get this kind of detail. So you can see the spiracles there. So that's kind of what I'm going to go for in this one. Okay, so let's subdivide. Get it up to, let's say, 5 million. And then we're going to go down to a lower, let's say, subdivision level 4. Again, with my polygroups, masked by polygroups on, and I still have polygroups. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start roughing this up a little bit using the clay tubes brush with a low Z intensity, maybe like 3 or 4. And this is kind of what I was doing last time on the thorax and on the head. And this is sort of like, think of it as an underlayer of organic detail, because I don't want things to be too smooth, because then they're going to look mechanical or artificial. And I want something that looks like it's grown and molted and seen some rough days. And so by doing this kind of undercurrent of organic detail, that's going to help out a lot. And then back to the earlier question of polygroups, this is a good example of where polygroups can be very helpful, because now I can control click on this just to isolate the visibility so that I can work on the interior, the parts that are not visible, or that, you know, they're overlapping. So just do this real quick. Control shift click on this one. And I'm also working symmetrically at this stage. Towards the end, when I put the fine detail on, I'll go in and start to turn symmetry off and make it a bit more asymmetrical in the detail. But I usually save that for later because it's faster to work with symmetry. I'm just using the inflate brush because some of these parts have gotten a little bit too thin. So I'm just going over here and inflating the edge a little bit. Make sure it's not inverting. You can also do this with like surface noise, but I like sculpting it manually, or manually or whatever, just to get in that kind of stochastic kind of randomness. Oops. The one thing on this bug that I definitely spend some time on later on after I have most of the other parts blocked out is the mouth parts. The insect mouth parts are really cool and interesting, and also challenging to kind of understand because they can vary in shape a lot. So one of the projects that I have been working on periodically is bee mouth parts, sort of orchid bee mouth parts versus honeybee mouth parts, and kind of looking at the differences there. They all have the basic same parts, but they're shaped wildly differently depending on the species. So I find that kind of stuff is interesting. Okay, so if I bring this up to the highest subdivision level, then what I'll do is I have a little bit of poke through here, so make sure I keep that under control. I'm going to take my SK cloth brush and kind of just right along the edge here, kind of pull this out a little bit. Kind of helps to emphasize the divisions here, but also makes it look a little bit more natural, because you'll see this kind of thing on insect parts. And now I want to make it nice and sketchy and not too precise. I think if you're interested in doing like spaceship design, modeling an insect is a great way to get some cool inspiration. Not that I'm an expert in that, but I've done a few spaceships, and I always try and bring in some insect-like designs there. Let's go back into YouTube's. This got a little bit too messy. Okay, so let's see how this thing's looking so far. I feel like it got a little too big, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, this is the abdomen interior, so let's rename this. Call this. I'm going to stick these into a folder. Then I'm going to transpose set so that it does both of the two subtools at the same time within the folder. Just bring it down a little bit because I feel like it got too big. Yeah, I think that looks better. Of course, I'm going to thin this out now so that will probably affect how big this looks, but let's do that, see how it goes. Let's save next. So take a look at the reference real quick. On this particular mud dauber, of course, you have this kind of thicker kind of quality to this part. I mean, this is, looks like, it almost looks like this is, well, no, it's one piece. See if I have another one up here somewhere. I don't think I want to make mine that thick. I want to make it a bit thinner. This one's interesting because it's kind of got a bulge right before it goes to that part. So some ideas that we can take from that. What did you miss? We worked on the abdomen today. So this right here, creating these parts. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and let's do a Dynamesh and a ZBrush. Let's make sure we have this turned off. Okay, I'll just do a quick ZBrush. Oh, whoops. Big smash. All right. Yeah, that's kind of ugly. What happened there? Oh, I had keep groups on, so let's undo that. Did I? No. Try one more time. I'm naming this sculpting a sci-fi bug, but I'm talking about anatomy as I go, at least what I know of it. This is sort of a bit of like informed creature design, you know, so I'm not quite sculpting a real bug, but I'm also using biology to inform my design approach, which is just one of many approaches to creature design. It's the one I prefer. I'm kind of following in the footsteps of Neville Page. He's always been a big inspiration for me because I like he has a very evolutionary approach to his designs. So that's kind of my bias, but I think there's lots of different ways to approach it. Okay, so that's gotten a little too thin. So let's use the inflate brush and move. To fix that a bit. This is a little too thin. Hold on a second. Let's do this. It's got a little wonky. Things get too wonky, you can always just get them down to a very low polygon count using ZBrush, and then it's easier to smooth things out and get rid of all the little wobbles and stuff. It's like a balloon animal now. It's going to look very different when we get wings on here, I think, and also when we start to refine the legs. So I'm going to do the legs next week, I think. That's what I'm going to focus on. And eventually I will be adding a lot more detail to the abdomen, but that's kind of like, I think, at a later stage. So I'm trying to bring up each different part of the insect, each of the different parts up to a certain level, and then I go back and start to do more detailing, and I just hit, you know, the sub list of subtools kind of becomes my to-do list. I keep going from the top to bottom, you know, usually head, thorax, abdomen, legs, and just repeat hitting those. And then of course the wings. The wings will be very interesting. I'm realizing now though that, you know, these are the openings for the wing muscles. I'm going to have to do a little bit more work in the thorax, because I think this right here is going to get in the way of the operation of the hind wings. So I might have to play with that a little bit more. I mean, I like the idea of these little spikities coming out, but I think that they might be an obstruction. So I'll have to play with that a little bit when I get to that point. I'm looking forward to doing the legs, because now it looks goofy with this nice body right here and these goofball legs. But I think we'll do that next time. So I'm going to just kind of continue to refine these bits for now. Well, I might start working on the legs, actually. Yeah, let's do that. Let's get started on the legs. I think this is in a good spot for now. So save next. Have I ever done sci-fi bugs? Okay, so two interesting questions. Have I ever done sci-fi bugs? Well, you can see them on my portfolio, but in terms of movies and stuff, I did. It's not really a bug, but it's inspired by a bug. If you watch the movie 10 Cloverfield Lane, at the very end, the monster that she blows up with the Molotov cocktail, that's one that I worked on, or I created when I was at Bad Robot, which was a lot of fun, and I used a lot of insect inspiration in that. They left me a lot of, they gave me a lot of creative leeway in making that. I mean, I had to follow a design and everything to match the other monsters in the movie, but at the same time, they kind of let me go with some ideas, which I thought was really neat. And when I was working at Bad Robot, they actually had a life-size model of one of the monsters from the first Cloverfield movie right next to the bathroom. So every time I got to go to the bathroom, I go and check out the monster and take a look at how they designed it. I think that's one of Neville Page's designs too. So I incorporated a lot of kind of like ant mandible kind of qualities into that one. I did actually get to work on a bug for Star Trek Beyond, but it only appears on the screen for about 12 frames. So it's a little more than a motion blur, which is very disappointing. But I think when Bones McCoy empties out a bag, a bug crawls out of it. So we did that bug. And then I've done, for entomology animated, I have a whole series. Those are real bugs, not sci-fi bugs. Well, not real bugs, but they're based on actual bugs in the real world. I'm trying to think of some other stuff that... Oh, yeah, if you go to see the planetarium show at Griffith Observatory, Signs of Life, I did a lot of the creatures in there, from little water organisms to fly and other stuff. And then, of course, since you asked, if you watch Wednesday, the opening title sequence, I did the orb weaver spider and the fly in that one. And I got nominated for an Emmy. So last weekend I got to go to the Emmys, and that was a lot of fun. We didn't win. Last of Us beat us. What are you going to do? But I did get to wear a tuxedo and hang out on the red carpet with all the Hollywood types, and that was kind of neat. And I actually ran into Neville Page there. That's why I've been thinking about him, which is kind of cool. So thinking, a lot of that kind of stuff. So I would say, okay, so... The comment is, when I observe insects and I try and think of the designers of nature, the engineers of life forms, or sorts of, so to speak, I think they're designed to fit into our world however, for specific reasons. So I think that's a very interesting comment. The only problem is that I disagree with almost everything in there. For example, if you're a person who believes in intelligent design, I'm somebody who's pretty strict when it comes to evolution. So we're going to have a conflict there from the get-go that's not going to be resolvable, unfortunately. But that's just my point of view. So I don't see, nature is a bottom-up design. Evolution is a bottom-up design. In other words, it's not like people are making decisions and crafting these things and coming up with an idea of how they fit into our world. It's more like nature tries everything, some of it works for a while, and when it stops working, that organism goes extinct. You know what I mean? The final stage of evolution is always extinction. It's when things don't work anymore. And so there's a problem I think a lot of people have when they start to think of evolution, and they do what is known as a teleological interpretation. A teleological interpretation basically means that you think that you get the impression that something serves a purpose, and so that's why it's evolved that way. And everybody kind of falls into this trap. A great example is we think of, human beings walked upright so that they could carry their babies or something like that, so that it made hunting easier. No, it's more like a bunch of different primates walked in many different ways. Human beings are just the ones that kind of started walking upright, and wouldn't you know it, that also helped with other things. So you have a lot of feedback loops in terms of how evolution happens, so it doesn't necessarily go into a predictable direction. So I have a sticking point on that. But again, that's kind of a point of view. There's some really cool books. There's a book called Arrival of the Fittest, which is a really fantastic book on evolution that has some great points on that. And then I think there's also The Accidental Species is a great book on human evolution. But again, they're kind of sort of a strict interpretation of it. So, I mean, evolution does design things, but it's like its process of design is very different from a human or an engineer's approach to design. But again, these are points of view. If you're not a big fan of evolution, then you probably would disagree with pretty much everything I'm saying. So, but that's kind of where my point of view is coming from. So thank you for allowing me to sermonize and also at the same time brag about my resume. So that's what live streams are all about, Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start blocking out the legs here, and So we can talk a little bit about leg anatomy here at the end of it. So insect legs are basically divided into segments, right? And they usually have around the same number of segments. Let's see if we can find a good picture of an insect leg here that's clear. You can actually kind of see part of it right here. We basically have the coxa, the trochanter, the femur, and the tibia, and then at the bottom we have a certain number of tarsus. Right here is a better way. So we have coxa, trochanter, femur, tibia, and this is the metatarsus, and then these are the tarsi, the smaller ones, and then you have the foot down here. And it's pretty much that arrangement on all insects. However, depending on the insect, sometimes those get really deformed into crazy looking shapes. Still the same basic idea though, right? Coxa, trochanter, femur, tibia, and then tarsi down here. I think I got that one right on that one. Mantis is a great example of leg anatomy that's gone totally crazy, but it's still the same pieces there. It's just they've just been exaggerated. So here, the tibia has these little claws on it, and then this metatarsus right here kind of folds in to create that kind of deadly clasping thing. But we can still see that we have like the coxa, the trochanter, the femur. It's a little bit hard to see the coxa and the trochanter here. The tibia, and then the metatarsus, and then you'll see on a lot of mantis legs, whoops, how they kind of split off there. The tarsus right here comes out in this weird way, but it's still the same segments. So that's kind of an interesting thing, and depending on the insect, sometimes they have more or less. I mean, this one's fairly elaborate in its anatomy. This is probably a beetle, but this is the tarsus right here. This is like, but you can see this case. Oh, well, I don't know exactly what this is, but you can see in this case it's got a longer piece down here. Still the same sort of smaller segments, but they're just stretched into different shapes. So sometimes the legs can be fairly plain. I always look for these nice, beautiful, elegant curves in the legs. S curves are kind of a nice motif that you'll find in a lot of insect legs. A lot of it has to do with how the muscles work on the inside. There's pairs of muscles on the inside of the bone right there. So these little subtle curves right here are something that's really nice to put in your insect legs. Try not to make them too straight because that's boring, right? Here's some beetle feet that are kind of cool. Okay, so let's take a look. First thing I want to do is position this better. So I'll go right like this. And then let's separate this into sections. So to do this, I'm going to go so I'm going to mask right there, Control W, that creates a polygroup. So here's another example of how you can use polygroups. So that's going to be the coxa. Control W. That will be the trochanter. Let's actually move this a little bit. Be nice and loose about this. This is going to be the femur right here. So let's do this. Control W, that'll be the femur. Mask right here. This is going to be the tibia. Control W. And then, whoops. This is the we can stretch these out later on. So I'll do that as metatarsus. And then I'll just make these into the tarsus, the smaller tarsi later. So I just have a bunch of polygroups there. So now what I can do is go down here to geometry under Dynamesh. I'm going to keep the groups button on, increase this a little bit, and then Dynamesh the surface. And with that groups button on, what's cool is this creates now closed surfaces for all of those polygroups. So I've just managed to separate this into little pieces just by creating polygroups, turning on the groups button, and hitting Dynamesh. So that's a nice way to very quickly block out the segments here, and now I can work on shaping them. And so I think this opening is a bit too big, but that's okay. We'll just make this nice and big. Let's take a look at our other wasp real quick. So you can see how these kind of fit together. These guys are kind of thick on this guy, but you can see it has just a little bit of an S curve there. If you take a look at that highlight, that's a little bit less obvious, but those kinds of details are the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. So I kind of want to make this kind of like, kind of like a cup. Let's turn our mask by polygroups. Yeah, the crustaceans and insects, of course, they're both arthropods. One of the cool things I think is the difference between crustaceans and insects, and there's a lot of difference. I mean, insects fall under hexapods, so they tend to have 6 legs, whereas crustaceans will often have like 10 appendages. But their exoskeleton, the crustaceans incorporate actual minerals into their exoskeleton, which is why they have that kind of bony quality to them, whereas insect exoskeletons tend to be a bit more like your fingernails, you know, the chitin. So I always find that kind of cool. I'm kind of just shaping these as blobs right now because I'm not exactly sure how I want these to look. One good example, if you're thinking about talking about design in nature, and there's a lot of really cool books on that kind of topic, but if you were talking about sort of, I mean, honeybees are a good example of an animal that has been partially designed by human beings, sort of by accident, because we've been using them for honey and agriculture for thousands of years, right, going way back to ancient Egypt. And that's plenty of time for the insects to change over evolutionary time, just like dogs, you know. I mean, dogs aren't wolves, obviously. and they've been shaped from wolves into domestic dogs by human interaction with them. So in a way, that's kind of like a design kind of thing. I don't know. I'm rambling at this point, but just a thought. Yeah, so references is a topic that I talk a lot about. So generally speaking, I kind of like have a hierarchy of reference. So the low-hanging fruit would of course be a Google image search, right? So that's nice and fast and quick, and you can get a lot of cool images that way, Pinterest or whatever. Next to that would be, obviously YouTube videos. It's good to watch videos too, because sometimes you see more when you see them moving around. Books, of course, are a huge part. That's where I get all my ridiculous insect stories, from reading books. And of course, they have a lot of cool pictures, but that's where you can find really high quality information, as well as illustrations on anatomy. The next level of reference would be to talk to an actual scientist, which I always think is good. So I have friends at the Natural History Museum, Brian Brown, Lisa Gonzalez, Emily Harptop, who's in Berlin right now, as well as some of the folks that I know at the Bug Shot Workshop. So it's nice to be able to have an expert to send a question to when you're not sure of something, or just to go and hang out and talk and hear cool insect stories. But then the best, of course, is to actually go out in the field with a camera and take pictures. Because then you're really up close and you're having to really spend time in their world, understanding how they behave, but also it gives you a much more personal connection with the thing that you're working on. So when I did a praying mantis, a green one, a few years ago, and that was after I went to Descanso Gardens here in Los Angeles and ran across a praying mantis and took a bunch of pictures, and that was great reference, so it was also inspiring. So like I used to do a lot of photography workshops. I'm probably going to get more into that when I get a chance, because that's a great way to meet people and spend time with bugs and learn stuff. And then of course another great way to get reference is to get yourself a microscope, and then you can buy insect specimens online. Dead ones, obviously, or find your own dead ones, and look at them through the microscope, and that's another good reference. So those are my various different sort of hierarchy of references, but usually I start with the Google image search, because that's fast and easy. But the problem with Google, of course, is that sometimes things are labeled incorrectly. Often they're labeled incorrectly, and they can be a little bit misleading. And then you're also stuck with whatever people have decided to post online. And rarely you'll get good shots of like the underside of the abdomen or something like that. You get a lot of great pictures of heads and things like that, but not so many good pictures of the more hard to reach areas, Seems a bit on the thin side, so I'm going to kind of do just a global inflate here. This little kink is driving me crazy. I think it's okay. Those legs are way too stubby. So. Now they're too thick. And this. I'm just kind of positioning this. It's a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna have to work in the proportions a little bit. I think it's okay, but not quite where I want it. That's okay. Yeah, that's a really good point about the AI, especially when if you're not sure what you're looking at is real and people are starting to throw. I mean, it's affecting everything. Macro photography is being affected a lot by it, and it's just easier to put a mishmash of whatever up there. So that's definitely making things harder for finding high quality references. The Jeeper Creepers Insect Monster. I don't know if I know that one. The clay buildup brush is the main difference between the clay and clay buildup brush is this one setting, which is buildup. If you take the clay brush or clay tubes, for example, even just the regular clay tubes, and turn on buildup, you will basically get the clay buildup brush. Right, so if I let me save this real quick. All right, so if I have regular clay tubes, right, so clay tubes. Okay, here's clay tubes, right? Here's clay buildup. So if I go to clay tubes and go into the brush palette and turn on buildup, I get clay buildup. I mean, Z intensity is probably a little bit different, but other than that, that's the main difference. Does he have, I don't know if I have his version of the clay tubes or clay buildup. I have TW clay. Yeah, I don't know if I have that brush of his loaded on here, but I'm sure he's probably just tweaked a few settings a little bit, you know. Sorry, I had a question here about Jeepers Creepers insect monster. Okay, so let's see. Let's see. Is that this guy right here? Yeah, I mean it's all right. It's to me, it's not really much of an insect, you know, because I mean for me, like he's got human eyes, right? So that's disappointing. If I was going to do insect inspired, I would definitely have insect eyes, you know, Omatidia and all that kind of stuff. The next thing is, you know, I mean, to me, it almost looks more like the creature from the Black Lagoon. You know, it's almost more like sea monster than insect. I would also, you know, think about the mouth parts rather than having human teeth. I mean, maybe he's like a, I don't know, is he like a mutant guy or something? I would make it more obvious that he was made up of plates. You know, the tergites. I mean, I think that's pretty cool. What is all this stuff, man? Just show me the damn picture. Yeah, the only thing that I really see that's kind of insect-like is kind of like, he does have kind of like pieces on his head that are represent kind of like tergites or pieces of chitin, which is kind of cool. But I would definitely like, you know, really work on the eyes, make them more insect-like and less human. And then I would I guess these are supposed to be antenna, but I would bring those lower on the face, maybe where the nose is even, and make them much bigger. Because that is, you know, an insect, its primary, usually not all of them, but a lot of them, their primary sensory input is the antenna. You know, if you look at dragonflies have huge eyes and then very, very tiny antenna, almost non-existent. Whereas if you look at mosquitoes, they have really big antenna. So it does vary, but I would definitely, I don't know, I think it could be more insect-like. That's basically what I'm going to go with. I would, you know, I would put like mandibles on here, maybe get rid of the nose, you know, make it more obvious. Also, there could be more variation in color on the face too, you know. It doesn't have to be this, but you know, I'm not the director. You know, it's like whenever you're looking at a production, it's ultimately up to the director what gets into the movie and what it doesn't. So I've worked with directors before that don't know anything about entomology and are not even slightly interested in it. So you kind of just end up wasting your breath trying to convince them to do something cooler. And this is kind of more interesting. It's a little bit overdone, but cool. I guess my designs tend to be a bit more on the conservative side. That's my bias. I mean, conservative meaning that I don't make him quite as wild and over the top as some people do, but that's just my own personal style, you know. Yeah, I mean, I think the design as a monster is cool, but if you call it an insect, that I'm not getting a whole lot of insect out of it. Okay, so that's going to be it for me for this week. Next week we'll continue, and we're going to work on the legs. which is going to require a lot of legs, a lot of work. The nice thing about insect legs is, at least for wasps, is if I can get the front legs looking good in a good place, then I can just duplicate them and change the shape a little bit and use it for the middle legs and the hind legs, so that makes it a lot easier. You can't always do that with all insects, like praying mantises, for example. The front legs look totally different than the other ones, but in case of wasp, it works pretty well. All right, I want to thank everybody for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I hope you had a good time and learned something, and, you know, try working on some bugs. After we do the legs, of course, I will do the wings, and the wings will be a lot of fun. I'll show you my approach to doing wings, which is something that I spent a lot of time perfecting over the years. Still not perfect, but getting there. All right, guys, I'll see you next time, next week at 7:30.